Hello and welcome back to Curiosity Mine, and welcome back to Lightning Ridge in northern New South Wales, Australia. This is the Lightning Ridge Cemetery, fairly obviously, and in most ways it's pretty similar to the cemeteries that you'll find in any other small country towns that you might visit, but it has a few quirks that make it interesting. So while I have the opportunity, I thought I'd show you a couple of things that make the Lightning Ridge Cemetery a little bit special. Lightning Ridge Cemetery dates back to 1905. Some sources say that it wasn't surveyed until 1907, along with the rest of the new town, which is now the town of Lightning Ridge. The earliest burials here were in 1905, which was 4 years after Opal was discovered at Lightning Ridge. 1905 was the year of the Sims Hill Opal rush, and 2 years later, 1907, was the year that the site of the new town itself was surveyed, this cemetery included. There are graves in the Lightning Ridge area that date back much earlier. Some lone graves on some of the old stations near Lightning Ridge date back to the 1850s at least. So things that make the Lightning Ridge Cemetery interesting. One of them is that funeral services at Lightning Ridge, for the most part, are provided by volunteers. This is something that's been in the news a few times over the past decade. There are a handful of very important people who commit their own time to ensuring that people are looked after when they really need it. This is part of how life, and I guess part of how death, goes in a remote community. There are a lot of essential services that are difficult or impossible to get access to quickly and easily when you live in a small community a long way from anywhere. Medical services, emergency services, those sorts of things. It's how it is, and funeral services are no different. The local volunteers really do need support from the community and from related organisations in order to keep doing what they have to do. And the media coverage certainly raises awareness of that, which is great, but it also kind of perpetuates the myth that there are no funeral services at all in a place like this, and that just isn't true at all. It's just a different situation here. Thank you to the people who take time out of their own lives to help people when they really need it so much. So as we look around the cemetery here, you'll notice that there are a lot of unknown graves. Not unmarked graves, but graves with little white crosses that simply say unknown on them. We know someone is buried there, we just don't know who it is or when they were buried. The simple and unfortunately rather boring reason for why that is that for a very, very long period of time, there were no good records kept of burials in this cemetery. There's a good chunk of the 20th century where burials were simply not well documented, or the documentation has been lost, which means that we literally just don't have enough information to properly acknowledge and mark the graves of the people who are buried here. And it's not for want of trying. There have been entire volunteer groups and some fairly large and ongoing research projects undertaken by the Lightning Ridge Historical Society and by others to try to fill in the gaps and give names and stories to some of the unknown residents that are buried here. But as of 2023, the gaps are still very large and the graves just remain unknown. And with regards to the white crosses that you see here, they were part of another project, again with fairly limited resources, was to mark and acknowledge as many graves as possible within this space to give the deceased the respect that they deserve, and to ensure that, as much as practical, there were no unmarked burials within the walls of the cemetery. I can assure you there still are, because again, huge project, no records. There are definitely unmarked graves here, but for the most part, a lot of effort has been taken to ensure that as many graves as possible are marked, even if they're just marked with a cross that says unknown. So some of them are marked to provide as much information as we have available about the individuals that are buried under them, and as much as it shouldn't matter, but it does, the little white crosses had to be made within a certain budget, so they are what they are, but there's a lot of care and effort has gone into marking the graves here. I'm not going to do a huge Patreon thing in the middle of a short video on a fairly morose subject, but here's the link if you want to support the channel, and very special thanks to these awesome people who are already doing so. Thank you so much. I'm sorry that your names are up in a video about a cemetery. I hope we're cool. And one final quirk of burials at Lightning Ridge is when you see some of the newer burial sites, you'll notice that the earth gets mounded up on top of the graves and generally left that way for quite a long time before a permanent memorial is built on top. This is certainly not common in other cemeteries, and it's largely due to the unique geology of Lightning Ridge. Lightning Ridge Cemetery is located on what is essentially a patch of black soil, which is the local terminology for this very fine powdery clay soil. Usually it's a dark grey colour, and you'll generally find it on the plains between the ironstone ridges in the Lightning Ridge area. It's a weird kind of soil. When it gets properly wet, it turns into the stickiest, most unforgiving mud that you can possibly imagine, and when it's dry, it tends to set as hard as concrete. It can be very hydrophobic. It's hard to get it wet, so it rejects moisture up to a point, which is a symptom of the semi-arid environment at Lightning Ridge. And when you dig a hole in the ground here and then you fill that hole back in with the same soil, the hydrophobic nature of the soil and the way it sets like concrete means that it takes a very, very, very long time for the soil to naturally compact down again and become level again. Even if you use heavy equipment to try and compact it down, you still won't get all of the air out and it will still settle even further. So if you were to scrape these heaps of dirt level, they will continue to sink down. And if you build monuments on top, the dirt underneath will continue to settle. So for the most part, these heaps of dirt are just left to settle on their own for a very long time before any kind of elaborate decoration is put on top of the graves. It's just how it works here. If you visit Lightning Ridge, and you should visit Lightning Ridge, I would recommend stopping by the cemetery as part of your visit. In fact, I would recommend stopping by the cemetery as part of any visit to any place, because cemeteries can tell us so much about the history and people of a community, and sometimes it's best not to take things at face value when you visit a place like this. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing to Curiosity Mine on YouTube and following along on social media. The links are in the description, and if you think these videos deserve it, you might also consider maybe supporting the channel on Patreon. The link is down there too. And thank you for watching.